Well, one of the big things that has been on everybody's mind in life sciences is just kind of the performance of the space. It's been really poor. John, you've been fortunate in that you don't have to look at equity markets every day.
Right now,
But for the rest of us, it's been pretty poor. I think I was looking at the XBI, and it bottomed out last summer of 2022, but it really hasn't done much since then. It's kind of oscillated around that kind of that 80 level, and and it seems like there's a recession on the horizon. Interest rates are moving up, so there's a lot of negative things out there. But M&A is the one thing that really seems to drive smaller company performance, and that has actually been up pretty nicely this year. I mean, I have some stats. I think so far to date, as of today, there have been 74 transactions worth 139 billion.
Yep.
And if you look at the last year period, it was 48 transactions at 51 billion. So, with that in mind, what do you think the environment looks like? John, I'll start with you. What do you think the environment looks like in terms of attractiveness for M&A activity?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see a pickup on that front. I think with the way the markets have beaten down companies over the last 18 months, I think there's a lot of value out there. And you had indicated it as well. There are a bunch of patent cliffs. There are companies that are looking to replace revenues that are going to go away here.
Pfizer being one of the big ones.
2025 and beyond.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's ripe for them looking and finding, new assets that are out there. I think there's a lot of interesting assets and companies that have value that's maybe not being fully appreciated in the marketplace. I do think we're going to see that pick up over the next 12 months, and I think it's already starting to happen. And there is, the balance sheets are in a pretty great
strong
place. Yeah, especially for the big pharmas, and I think they do need to generate new revenues and replace old ones, and so I think that will drive a lot of the activity.
Yeah, I think E&Y does like an annual report where they look at I think they call it firepower or something like that, and I think they said there's $1.4 trillion of firepower out there for buying, in the pharma space for buying assets. So, what do you think that means for companies like Vivus that are private? Does it?
Yeah, no, I think everybody's an attractive asset if you need to buy revenue and you need to buy earnings, and if you got good patent portfolio. But one of the things that we look at, so we're part of the Icon group, and so Carl is a well-known, very famous investor, and so if you look at the publicly traded biotechs, there's about 700 of them. About 100 of them are going to run out of cash in the next year. Mm-hmm. And there's some really interesting opportunities in there. So those are things that we try to keep track of. We're not going to swing like a Pfizer or one of the other large pharma companies, but there are in the private equity world, there's a lot of people who are trying to do these roll-ups where they're trying to bring a collection of assets together, run them very, very efficiently. From a cost and operating model perspective. And so we continue to see that as kind of the forte of what we're trying to figure out.
Mm-hmm. Actually, you brought up an interesting thing that there are a bunch of companies that are running out of cash. There are also a number of other companies that are trading below cash on their balance sheet. Right. So that's an interesting dynamic, those two things kind of existing at the same time.
Right.
But that kind of, I think, goes again to the value that might be there. And another thing I think about in terms of values, we've seen share prices come down, but we've seen programs advancing. Your program is one example of that. You've gone from phase 2 to phase 3 and have very successful results. What do you think about that, I guess, dichotomy of, the way that the share prices have moved and kind of the science has advanced? What explains that?
Well, I do think the backdrop of interest rates is having an impact. I mean, when you can go earn 6% on a risk-free CD or treasury, that's going to suck some capital out of the equity markets. So that's clearly having an impact. I also think there's probably a fair number of companies that went public that maybe shouldn't have or got funded, where that should have gone to more useful purposes. And so I think some of that culling is probably natural at this stage. And there's going to be some winners and there's going to be some losers. There's still some great assets out there. And even in companies that have a broader portfolio, I think they're going to have to down select to their lead horse or candidates that really should drive the most value. And I think some of that's a natural process that the markets need to go through, though at the moment it's been a painful year and a half or so. And I think there's probably still a little bit more to come until we get better clarity on interest rates that, we'll see kind of how this year ends, and, still optimistic as we get into next year, but it's been an interesting window here through 2023.
Probably when we look back on this time, we'll have thought, man, everything was so cheap we should have bought, right? And we'll say, why didn't we do anything?
Yeah.
But John, do you have any thoughts on that kind of the move in share price versus kind of the science advancing and
Well,
things getting better after COVID?
Yeah, I think, for those of us who've been in this market for a long time, I've seen 6 swings like this.
Oh, yes.
And so, as you move through these processes and move through these big swings in the capital markets, you have to continue to build your portfolio of products. And so, because hopefully when you come out with an approved product or a broader indication for your drug or whatever the case may be in terms of the goals that you're chasing, the valuations will return. I think there's still one of the things that people don't talk about too is that the government, from an Inflation Reduction Act, that has created some ambiguity around our rebates with the federal government.
Okay.
And
negotiating aspects.
Yeah,
of it.
negotiating
Yeah.
drug prices. So
Yeah.
there's this kind of pall over the drug industry related to pricing.
Yeah.
And some of our pricing authority has gone away, and depending on where you sit in the economic curve, that's either a good thing or a bad thing for you. But ultimately, there is this ambiguity that exists. Inflation has been a problem, interest rates have been a problem, but the Inflation Reduction Act has probably created some consternation for pharma that the average regular investor doesn't quite understand.
Yeah, I've heard of some companies pulling back on small molecules and then favoring maybe biologics because of the way
Because of
it's
that,
written.
exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely true.
There's another factor out there that I think has been really important that was a direct result of COVID, and that was just the likelihood of the FDA approving things. And I think we saw, from probably 2020 to 2022, a lot of things that went to the FDA that probably a lot of people thought would get approved, didn't get approved. Maybe they got a CRL, maybe it got delayed. And I think investors looked at that and they said, this kind of probability of success that we attach, it's lower than we had estimated before. However, I think though that recently, maybe we've kind of overcome that somewhat. And I just was wondering that, what you both think about that, how the FDA has kind of come through COVID. Obviously they were very distracted with all that was going on, but it seems like we've kind of made it over the hump.
Yeah, I hope so. I think there is a backlog.
Just in time for cytisinicline.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. When you look at some of the backlogs on FDA inspections, things like that,
Exactly.
I think that they're finally digging themselves out of that hole. They've been serially underfunded, which I think has also not helped their cause.
Right.
But I think it's hard to make full generalizations. I think every product submission is different in terms of the breadth of the evidence and things like that. I would hope we get some additional funding there. They, kind of get back on track and start to work to get new agents moving forward to market. There's huge needs in a lot of different areas. And so, I think as long as they can move through their process swiftly and diligently and get to good answers on the other end, I think that should be a good, healthy ecosystem.
Yeah, certainly. Well, one last topic I thought we could talk about was, the banking crisis, which happened earlier this year. That might be something that slows down some of the return, the return to normalcy that we might hope for. Any thoughts on the impact of that bank, of one of the major kind of life sciences banks going away? Are we able to absorb that and pick it up elsewhere, or was it a problem that will carry on?
No, I think first off, I think that the federal government did a very good job of coming in and covering Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah.
Just making sure it became actually one of the most secure banks shortly after that happened, right?
Exactly.
I think people were like, "Whoa, if that thing goes away, that's all bad." So I think that was actually a great thing that the government came in and stepped in. In terms of us, we're a cash flow generating company, so we're in a very different life cycle spot than a lot of the companies that leverage Silicon Valley Bank. But in terms of just capital that's chasing 11 to 18% returns, if you have a fairly secure asset and you're in a senior secured position, there are a number of banks that will step into that paper now. And so it hasn't been this dramatic fall off or a dramatic constriction in the marketplace. It was a little scary there for a couple of days, but I think overall our industry has absorbed that very, very well. Some of the other things I mentioned earlier caused a little bit more consternation, at least in my sleep pattern.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, great. So we've had a really nice conversation today with the three Johns, myself, Senior Biotech Analyst John Vandermosten. We have the CEO of Vivus, John Amos, and we have the CEO of Achieve Life Sciences, John Bencich. And thank you for joining us.